Hello you lovely people. Before I begin with this video, do you like my shirt? This isn't leading into some sort of weird sponsorship, no, it's just I try to wear a different shirt in each one of these Patreon videos, and I can't be bothered going to check if I've worn this one yet, so if I've worn it before, I have a washing machine and it works, so haha. If I wanted to go for an actual pun, I could look through my wardrobe and see if I have a Czech shirt, but this is just gonna have to do, haha, I didn't write an intro to this video. Hello everyone, I am Tessellating Hexagons, and since we're knee-deep in the 2018 Eurovision season, or nipple-deep if you're watching this on YouTube a month after its initial release on Patreon, it would seem to me to be a very difficult time indeed to do in-depth reviews of countries that are currently participating in the contest, given that everything is more likely to change now than any other time of year. Of course, that means it's only natural that I completely ignore that logic and do one last video of that kind before retreating to safer topics for subsequent months for a little while. For now, let's take a look at the Czech Republic, or Czechia, as some people prefer to call it. Some people do want there to be a one-word name for the country. I'm going to go with the Czech Republic because that's what it's called in my country at the moment. The UK doesn't yet recognise Czechia as a name, but that might change, but for the time being, Czech Republic, because they've already chosen their entry for the 2018 contest, so we've got something of a motivation there to try and use their past to forecast their present and their immediate future, and inevitably miss the mark entirely because, But first, let's lay the foundation for that with a few fast facts about the landlocked Central European Republic. The national broadcaster is Česká televize, and there's no real convenient way of abbreviating that in English. I mean, really, how would I say that? Just using the English alphabet and only the English alphabet. C with a caron, T, CT but there's a thing, CT but the first letter has a little hat but it's upside down. Let's just call it Cheaty and hope that I'm understood. How about that? As of his installation in November of 2015, the current head of delegation is Jan Bors. Information is just a little bit scarce about who his predecessor was, but that doesn't matter at this point, though said predecessor was responsible for the country's debut as late as 2007, with the rock group and throat lozenge spokespeople Kabat and the song Mala Dama, which means Little Lady. This would go on to be not only the only of their entrants in the Czech language, but also one of their worst placings at the contest, with a catastrophic single point and in an unprecedented 28th place. That said, they got 0 points in 2009, which, under the then-current voting system, was highly improbable. You decide which one was worse. On the other side of that, their best placing, at the time of recording this video, belongs to Gabriela Gunčíková, who represented her country in 2016 with the song I Stand, finishing a tragic 25th of 26 in the final, with 0 points from the public vote, despite her 41 from the juries. However, hopes are high for the 2018 candidate Mikolas Josef. We'll check back in with him later this year and see if he's made history for his country. The Czech Republic has always held just a little bit of mystique for me at Eurovision. You know how there are some countries that wouldn't miss the contest for the world, and then there are some that do their best to take part but sometimes it just doesn't work out? Well, the Czech Republic, in my mind, is part of a third category that doesn't really fall into one of those two. It's the next step along in the scale. The ones that I'm really happy to see take part, and that I'm really worried could just give up at the drop of a hat. I'd like to call that category the forbidden fruit countries. You know who you are, you know who they are, they know who they are, they know who you are. And it's really hard to blame me, or so I'd like to think, for categorizing them that way. The Czech Republic made their debut in the first contest that I watched in earnest in 2007. True, I didn't watch the semi-final, so they may as well not have been there since they didn't qualify, but I don't actually remember all that much from the final itself. Rather, what held my interest in those early days was the compilation CD, and of course, good old Czechiroo sure as hell held a place on that. It took me several years to build up the right amount of interest in the contest, collecting the compilation albums all the while, so perhaps I took the Czech Republic for granted, which is why it was all the more jarring to see them suddenly vanish from the lineup in 2010. My personal fan hype reached its current velocity in about 2011 or 2012, so by that point I was highly conscious that the Czech Republic were, at the time, a profoundly lost love. Just imagine, a country that had been present for every edition that I've been paying attention to just suddenly vanishing. I mean, sure, they're not the only ones to do that, but the 3 Czech entries had caught my attention in their own unique way, and I was sad to see them go. Naturally, you can imagine my delight when they announced their unexpected return out of the blue in 2015, after several years of them being nothing more than a pipe dream, or, at best, a footnote graffitied into the returning countries section on the Wikipedia page for each year's contest. Absence, as they say, makes the heart grow fonder, and so the Czech Republic's 5-year absence absence from 2010 to 2014 has made me all the more thankful for their presence now in the present day. It's prodigal son syndrome, sure, but hey, let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. They're back and I'm happy to see them. We'll begin by taking a look at where things started for the Czech delegation. Now, you might think that would be 2007 when they first participated, but no, actually, we need to go a bit further back than that. Actually, we need to go almost half a century back from that, to the years prior to the dissolution of Czechoslovakia. As a unified state, Czechoslovakia never made any distinctive moves towards taking part in the contest, but they did broadcast the contest several times during the 1960s and 70s. There isn't much documentation on the specifics of that, so we don't know how many editions or even if they showed the contest live, but the fact remains the people of Czechoslovakia were aware of the contest's existence, whether that was up to the minute with the actual shows or if they were just showing archive footage for some reason. I mean, you wouldn't have thought they would, but you never know. In fact, they were so aware of it that, following the so-called Velvet Divorce, which took effect on the 1st of January 1993, the newly independent Slovakia immediately signed up to take part in Eurovision that year, and proceeded to have one of the spottiest and most unfortunate runs of luck in Eurovision history, but we'll talk about Slovakia another time. And if anyone from Slovakia happens to be watching this, please come back. We miss you. I'm sure the Czech delegation misses you too. So that's all well and good, but it does mean that everything was still quiet on the Czech side of things. As far as my research has turned up, the Czech Republic had no particular interest in pursuing the contest despite being aware of it and despite Slovakia's fresh-faced optimism in the 90s. A part of it was down to the political fallout from the dissolution, and another part of it was down to that old adage of just not having the money. Partly because of the dissolution. Their non-involvement would continue into the mid-2000s when someone at HeatherOnStevia finally stood up and said, hey, let's do Eurovision after all. And so the Czech Republic found itself on the roster of countries set to debut in Kiev in 2005, alongside Bulgaria, Moldova and Lebanon. However, that brought the total number of participants up to 41, which at the time the EBU deemed to be too large for the format, because goodness knows it didn't occur to them for another 3 years that they might want to adopt a 2 semi-final format. No, that would be too fair and make too much sense. In the end though, the drama with Lebanon ended up happening, reducing the count by 1, but not before HeatherOnStevia backpedaled on their decision too, citing their participation in 2 other major television events in that year anyway, and fearing that their audience would be spread too thinly to properly engage with the contest and thus not see a financial return on broadcasting it, much less public interest. Despite this, in their statement of withdrawal at the end of 2004, HeatherOnStevia claimed to be optimistic about the possibility of making their debut the following year. Of course, as we're well aware, this ended up not materialising once again, this time blaming the cost of participation and in a display typically associated with Monaco and Luxembourg, a fear that they wouldn't stand a chance in the semi-finals, and if they couldn't guarantee themselves a place in the attractive Saturday programme, then it just wasn't worth the investment, despite the fact they'd have to broadcast the final anyway to vote in it. Seems kinda selfish to me that they'd rather shun a lineup of 24 countries' entries just because their own isn't among them, but hey, the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. And so, after a fashionable delay of humming and hawing, HeatherOnStevia went back on their word once again and debuted in 2007, and, much like Slovakia before them, proceeded to have some of the worst luck in Eurovision history. Seriously, is that part of Europe just cursed or something? All japes aside, knowing that that was the mentality the Czech broadcaster was going into the contest with, it suddenly comes as much less of a surprise that they withdrew after 2009, as well as making it an impressive achievement that they lasted as long as 3 years before throwing in the towel to begin with. But let's not skip over those 3 crucial years. Kabat, Teresa Karnlova, and Gypsy.cz all played vital roles in the development of the Czech Republic's Eurovision presence, and to be quite certain, if it hadn't been for them and their results, their country wouldn't be where it is today. I mean, obviously, geographically it wouldn't have moved, but you know what I mean. First up, chronologically, is the rock band Kabat and the 2007 entry Mala Dama, which, as we've established, means Little Lady. While sending rock songs was the in thing at the time off the back of Lordi's success the preceding year, Kabat met with a terrible fate indeed, placing stone dead last in what would be the longest Eurovision show of all time, clocking in at 28 countries. And to add insult to injury, they only received a single point, and from Estonia at that. At a glance, that should come as a surprise. I mean, no love from Slovakia? Whatever could have happened? Well, the Czech debut entry actually predated Slovakia's return to the contest by 2 whole years. Yes indeed, Slovakia had been absent from the contest since 1999 and wouldn't return for some time yet, and that's where this tragic tale continues. But before we get to that though, let's at least spend a moment contemplating Kabat's fate. As I joked earlier in this video, the lead singer of the group, at least in the song in question, sounds like for the full 3 minutes he's in dire need of a throat lozenge. I mean, seriously, he sounds like he's one good coughing fit away from singing like an opera star. Perhaps those crunchy vocal stylings didn't make the necessary connection with the audience in 2007, perhaps it was the Czech language itself. After all, it is a bit of a not so widely spoken language, so it would present itself as more of an esoteric celebration of Czechness than a song for a multinational stage to fully appreciate. Whether or not that was the reason, the Czech broadcaster took notes and retreated to prepare for the following year's attempt. And so their 2008 approach kept the national final flavoured efforts that they'd established 1 year prior, now featuring a few more non-Czech language offerings to see if that was where they'd gone wrong. When all was said and done, they ended up with Teresa Koundlova, a pop singer of the former group Black Milk, and the sensory delight that was Have Some Fun. Unlike Mala Dama, it was cheerful, energetic, and in English, theoretically broadening its appeal to many more potential voters. On paper, it was just what the Czech Republic needed. In practice, however, the song received a sum total of 9 points. 5 from FYI Macedonia, 2 from Croatia, and 1 each from Malta and Turkey, and finished 18th out of 19, ahead of only Hungary. Personally, I think that's tragic, because simplistic though the lyrics were, Have Some Fun was an absolute bop, and you cannot convince me otherwise. That said, her live performance left more than a little to be desired, and that is something of an understatement in brutal honesty, so the final outcome isn't all that much of a surprise. It's tragic though. And so Chiti went back to the drawing board once again. Luckily, they'd spotted a pattern in their 2 national finals so far. The Romany band Gypsy.cz had participated both times and finished within the top 3, or so it's been reported, both times as well. Logically, they thought that meant that the group was popular and that they deserved a shot at Eurovision. What's the worst that could happen, right? Chiti would live to regret asking that question. Yep, as we all remember, or those of us who are old enough to anyway, since this is nearly 10 whole years ago at this point, Chiti held one more national final for the 2009 contest. This time, it was set in stone that Gypsy.cz would be their representative. The only question put to the public was which song, out of 2, the group would bring to the stage in Moscow. Whether the public made the wrong choice on that matter is unclear to this day, as there's simply no telling whether it was the group's quirky remediation of Romany culture that didn't resonate with the voting public, or the lead singer's personality, or the character of Super Gypsy that he portrayed during the song, or even the song itself. But whatever the case may be, the group utterly failed to connect on the night, and took home not only last place, but the third ever true nil point of the 21st century. Suffice it to say, Chiti were less than pleased, and so, citing low public interest and a lack of funding to pour into what they saw as a hopeless venture, they closed the book on Eurovision participation for what most of the fandom thought to be once and for all, until one fateful day 5 years later. It would be so much more straightforward if Jan Bors had been appointed as head of delegation 1 year sooner, so that the Czech return to the contest, and thus the refreshed influx of interest in the contest on the part of his countrymen, could be attributed to him. But strangely, no, it was the previous head of delegation that decided that the contest deserved one more shot from the Czech broadcaster. And so, Václav Neudbáta and Marta Jandová were sent off to Vienna to prove, in spite of everything, that hope never dies. And I totally wasn't hyped about that. Once again, the Czech Republic failed to reach that year's final, but something was different this time. With the renewed interest in the contest and the revised, internally selected approach, Chiti had hit upon something of a sleeper favourite amongst fans. While it wasn't popular enough to go toe-to-toe with some of the stronger contenders of that year's contest, it was, at least, well enough received to reach an unprecedented 13th place in its semi-final, and that's when things really started to change back home in Prague. Now, after the 2015 contest, as we know, the former head of delegation stepped down and handed their role over to Mr. Bors. Admittedly, the 2016 selection process was a little bit unclear. 3 artists had been shortlisted for an internal selection, supposedly, and the eventual winner was none of them. But in the end, that decision would make history for the country. Gabriela Gunčíková, rather famously, became the first Czech entrant to qualify for a Eurovision final, placing 9th in her semi-final. Alas, she performed in the dreaded O2 spot in the final and received 0 points from the public vote, finishing 25th out of 26 overall. However, the impact had already been made. Gabriela had done her job superbly, proving that a Czech qualification was more than possible. With this renewed confidence, Chiti followed that routine again in 2017, selecting Martina Barta, no relation to Václav, and the song My Turn, though it was rumoured that their soon-to-be 2018 representative, Mikolas Josef, had originally been in the running to perform that song in Kiev instead. Tragically, either way, it placed 13th once again, but this actually wasn't a bad thing, despite the Czech pessimism of the previous decade. In fact, this proved once and for all that the new Czech approach was working. Gone were the days of festering at the bottom of the semi-final scoreboard with less than 10 points. Now they knew for certain that qualifying was possible, just not guaranteed. But just the fact that it was on the cards was good enough to keep things going. Which brings us to the present day, shortly after Mikolas Josef's Lie to Me was chosen from an internally selected shortlist by a public vote and to a fair amount of international acclaim. Observing the patterns of the Czech results of the previous years, it would be a fair assumption to conclude that 2018 is the culmination of not just years, but decades of learning from previous failures, which ought to stand the Czech Republic in good stead going forwards. If nothing else, the Czech people have more confidence in their song, and Europe has more confidence that their act will deliver, and perhaps even establish a new chapter in their country's history, one dedicated to a more consistent run of qualification. But we'll have to wait and see just how that turns out. For now though, it falls to me to assign good old Czechiroo a grade for their efforts. Time was, they would get an E from me. But that would just be if they'd given up after 2009 and never come back, Slovakia. But considering their return, which is more triumphant than it looks on the surface, I would say, to recognise their willingness to learn and apply that knowledge with each passing year, that the Czech Republic, as befits their name, earns a rank C. Because C for Czech. Obviously. At the time of recording, we have yet to see too much of a payoff to their methods as far as results go, but it's an encouraging sign that their 2018 candidate has inspired such optimism, as well as the song and the way it was selected, right down to having an extensive international jury comprising nothing but Eurovision graduates from across time and Europe, demonstrates applied learning and forwards progress. So, it's a passing grade for their efforts and execution, but I can't go higher than a C just yet, because we can't overlook that catastrophic false start of theirs from 2007 to 2009, and we don't have overwhelming proof that their new methods have actually worked yet. I mean, sure, we can see that their return in 2015 decidedly marked a new, better, fresh, new era for the country, but with just one qualification out of 3 attempts, they may still be in the testing phase. If it pays off, then totally expect that rank to go up, because we can't hold them accountable for their past forever, but for the time being, that does define them more than their successes, but that is all set to change. For now, while we wait with bated breath to see if all of this self-experimentation really will pay off in Lisbon, I shall bid you a fond farewell, and also strongly recommend against holding your breath from February to May, or March until May if you're not one of the lovely people who supports me on patreon.com/TessHex. Segue! For as little as $1 per video, as I've oh so subtly implied, you can see these videos 1 whole month ahead of time before anyone else, as well as receiving a whole host of other sexy little perks, depending on your tier of generosity. That also means that if you're watching this on YouTube, there will be 2 totally new videos available to watch right now exclusive to Patreon the moment you start pledging. For now though, I shall thank my supporters, you are lovely amazing people, without whom I wouldn't be doing these videos, and I shall remind you that I have been, and will continue to be, Tessellating Hexagons, and I shall see you in whichever one of my videos you happen to check out next. No high five? Okay, well, see you then.